So, can anybody read this? Who knows LeetSpeak? So, in simpler terms, it's that. So I thought I saw a HAXOR. Okay, so this talk is about threat hunting, and I'm going to go through some of my experiences building a threat hunting type program, and also talking to companies that are trying to do threat hunting, and I'll try to portray some of the realities and some of the misconceptions, because you see a lot of people like companies talking about threat hunting and that they're doing threat hunting for you and things like that. So this is me. I'm going to skip over that. If you want to know me, just come up during the breaks. So what's threat hunting in practice? Threat hunting in practice is actually an analyst versus an adversary. We were talking about actually going into depth about looking at your adversary and trying to become your adversary, so thinking like your adversary. It's also about being creative and adaptive. You know, we talk about in incident response, you do a lot of procedural-based and process-based investigations. This is a lot more about being creative, a lot more about thinking outside of the box and looking for things that you've never seen before. One of the things that you need to understand is that it's really about understanding your environment, defining what you're looking for, and then really applying a baseline of normal to your environment. So to address threat hunting, you need to understand your environment. You need to understand what's going on in your network. You need to understand what's going on in your endpoints. So you need to have a kind of normalization of events that you think are supposed to be in your environment versus those that aren't supposed to be. And it's also about finding really what's evading your automatic detections. So you need to, it's really being proactive, right? A lot of the automated detections, stuff that you have already in place in the SIMs, the rules and things like that, is a reactive type technology, right? You're looking at alerting based on something that you know or something that somebody's told you that's known. But here you're actually looking for things that are outside of that known box. You're looking for things that are attacking your infrastructure. So you need to understand your applications, your systems, analyze the gap between what you think is secure and what might not be secure. So you got to think in that mentality of what can be used in my environment to attack me. The teams need to get knowledge of their infrastructure. They need to understand what's happened, what systems are deployed out there, where the businesses are moving in terms of applications and what they're doing with those applications. You want to identify common business workflows as well. A lot of attacks happen because there's a flaw in some of the business workflows, right? So your users are getting attacked because they're doing things that you haven't thought about or you haven't seen outside the box. A real key thing to this is contextual awareness, right? You need to understand the context of what's going on what the attacker's doing, and you need to understand the context of what brought an attack on. And one of the key benefits is if you're doing it right, you're actually documenting what you're doing. You're documenting your environment. So you're bringing this operational knowledge to the company and organizational knowledge. And that sounds really good with management, right? Because they're sitting here going, well, you're putting into place this program, but what benefits does it really bring us? Well, you're actually starting to document your infrastructures. You need to do that because you need to understand how the attacks are going to go through your environment. So, you know, there's a lot of things about threat hunting. The reality is that you think you're going to feel like predator, but the reality is it's a person sitting behind a screen looking at a crap load of logs. Okay, and I'm talking lots and lots of logs. So at the end of the day, you're like that. You're not really like the predator. So you need some tools to actually get this done. Most people focus on the network aspects of threat hunting. Today, a lot of organizations say, well, we've got all these logs coming in from our network devices, from our servers, but you need to go further than that, right? So you need to look at the firewalls, you need to look at the IDS, IPSs, you need to look at your network devices, but you also need to start bringing in your endpoint solutions, and that's where you're going to generate a crap load of logs, right? You feed those into you have to feed those in centrally so that you can use them. There's a lot of good open source tools too and built-in stuff. So you've got Bro IDS and passive DNS type queries that you can gather. PowerShell, WinRM are really useful as well, because those not only are good for you as the admin or as an IT security person to actually detect, but as we saw this morning, you can actually use PowerShell to do some really nasty things in the target's environment. WAR is 99% information. So the more you gather, the better off you'll be. The problem is, the more you gather, the harder it is to manage and harder it is to analyze. That's where SIMs come in. You will not be able to do this without a SIM, or my favorite right now is ELK. So because ELK you can actually put in, it's a lot cheaper than building a Splunk infrastructure. Although I've heard some companies tell me that it isn't, but so I don't know. You know, it's like you choose your engine of choice, then you start feeding everything into it. So typically what we see, firewall logs. So what you're looking for in firewall logs is unusual IP addresses, countries, businesses, proxy logs. Proxy logs are really interesting. So are you seeing, you know, the right traffic in your proxy? Do you see bytes in and byte equal to bytes out? That's a really interesting one to look for, because bytes in, bytes out means there's something going on. If you don't understand why bytes in and bytes out is interesting, come see me afterwards and I'll explain it. Dynamic DNS, unique user strings, Windows logon attempts, user additions to privilege groups. Antivirus logs are useful. Process maps, all running systems, privilege escalations, and some of your endpoint detection solutions. And that's where I really got into it, because you can generate a crap load of data with endpoint solutions, right? Carbon Black, for example, the CBR stuff on a 20,000 park installation can generate up to 16 gigabytes of logs per day, right? So you're going to be managing lots of logs. This morning, MITRE was referenced, right? The MITRE attack, there's the attack chain. Here's the problem I have with that, is that, in fact, attackers don't actually follow any attack chain, right? Our colleague this morning said that, you know, it doesn't really come in this order, but the fact of the matter is these attack chains and definitions are really great for reporting and giving management an idea of what happened in your environment, but to use them for detection is a whole load of crap, because you cannot determine what was the order by just saying, oh, it was an exploit, then it was an infiltration, then it was a persistence technique. They don't do it that way. They do it the way that they feel like doing it. And that's where we come back to being that creative, out-of-the-box thinking, right? You need to think that things aren't happening in a set order in your environment. So there's a lot of tempting technologies out there to consider when you're doing threat hunting. The idea behind this is that you want to reduce the load of work that you're going to have to do, or the amount of information you have to go through, because you're going to be going through a lot of information. So you're going to start applying solutions where you can actually look at things like reducing the noise. So matching against IOCs and TTPs, matching against feeds. So if you can match those, you already know that something's going on, and you can pass it on to the next phase, which would be actually incident handling. Another really good thing is user analytics. We're starting to see some really good stuff around user analytics and machine learning. The idea behind machine learning is that if you apply it right, you can start to weed out certain activities, and you can start to highlight certain activities as suspicious that you could then go dig. That's the idea. But there's nothing better than a pair of eyes in front of a screen. The human brain works in a much different way than a computer. And if you get the right people to do threat hunting, the creative types, the guys that can think outside, I keep saying, think outside of the box, because you're not thinking in that process-driven manner. If you can find those people, them staring at a screen is going to be a lot more effective than machine learning. So let's just do a test. For those who know this, please don't spoil it for the others. Please stare at the screen for like a few seconds. Whoops, sorry. Okay. So there is so Amy Herman, she's an MD, and she does these classes and she teaches them to forensics people, like the police type forensics and things like that. It's called The Art of Perception, and she actually has a book on it. In it, she describes how we don't look at things properly because we've got a pre-built disposition to look at things in a certain way. So we need to retrain ourselves to look at things in a different manner, to actually build, to actually go back and assess what we're looking at, to then describe it, then go back and look at it again, see if we've described it properly, and then keep going through that rotation until you've optimized the way of looking at things. And I think this applies really well to threat hunting because we tend to look for what we know about, right? And the whole idea behind threat hunting is that you want to look for something that you don't know, right? That you've never seen before. So you need to teach yourself to weed out that predisposition of actually looking at things in a specific way. And, you know, Henry David Thoreau said, we only find the world we look for. So if you think, oh, I need to find that APT group from China that's attacking my company because they want my intellectual property, that's all you're going to be looking for, unfortunately. In the back of your head, that's what you're going to be looking for. So you're going to use some of those MITRE ATT&CK definitions and look for that specific pattern. But patterns evolve. Things evolve. The attackers evolve. They start to use different types of solutions to attack you. And if you're looking for that specific attack pattern, you're just doing incident response, right? You're just doing traditional incident response where you've detected something and you want to go back and look at it. So, does anybody know what this is? For those who've never seen this image before. I heard it. Who said a cow? It's a cow. And that's what I mean by you need to. I don't want to go into philosophy, theology, but that's the idea behind we need to retrain the way we look at things, right? Because a lot of people see things differently, but once you've actually looked at it once, gone back, somebody's highlighted a piece of it for you, you start to build a better image. If I take away the line now, you still see the cow, right? And that's what the art of perception kind of teaches you. It's a really good book. I recommend reading it. Because she teaches you, she goes through steps on why you're not looking at things properly. So, what time? I'm good? So, what I do is I do a lot of endpoint work, right? So, Digital Guardian, we have an endpoint solution, things like that. But it generates a shitload of data as well. But I've always been into the endpoint protection because from my perspective, you know, perimeter died a long time ago. And the fact of the matter is the attacker is actually looking for the endpoint, right? He wants to get to the endpoint. If he can hit the endpoint, he has access to your environment. He has access to the servers. He can potentially have access to anything he wants. So what you're looking for at the endpoint is the processes that are running. Do they normally run in your environment? Which ones don't actually belong? So if you have standard images in your environment, you can actually start to build maps of processes that should be running on an image and those that shouldn't, right? So you can actually start to weed out the ones that are running and then actually focus on the ones that shouldn't be running. Which ones are running in privileged escalation or execution? Typically, you should only find 3 or 4 accounts running on a machine if it's not a shared machine, right? So you should only find the system accounts plus whatever the user account's name is. If there's a secondary user account name or an admin account name, you'd have to start to question why is that running at the same time. Network activity. Network activity coming out of an endpoint is actually really interesting because it can be quite different from the network activity that you're seeing in your firewalls because, well, for one thing, if you've got somebody's put in a Tor proxy or anything like that, you're going to see the Tor traffic. You're not going to see the applications initiating the connection through that Tor tunnel. But if you're monitoring the endpoint, you can actually see those connections. So you can actually see the original destination IP address that the user's trying to go to or that the process is trying to go to. And, you know, a lot of organizations, oh, sorry, WannaCry taught us that's not true. You know, when I did this presentation a few months ago, it was like a lot of organizations practice putting local firewalls on their machines. Then WannaCry happened. Obviously, they don't. But anyway, if you do have a policy where you're running local firewalls, is it on? Has it been turned off? You know, look for the command that turns it off. It's one of the first techniques that attacker uses to bypass any kind of security. More system information. So Stuxnet, I use Stuxnet as an example because Stuxnet actually changed some of the kernel drivers, right? Or installed additional kernel drivers. So are you able to actually detect that with your endpoint solutions? Do you know if that's actually happening? Persistence. A lot of people, when they look for persistence, how many of you focus on persistence on the one key? Be honest. Okay, good. Because persistence, there's a lot of techniques to do persistence. Right. So you could do things like links inside Explorer. You can have service, host. Oh God, I've forgotten. I'll skip that. Schedule tasks, and you can do services as well. Know what your services are running. Sorry, I lost track of what I was thinking. My endpoint. I said it earlier. The endpoint is the target of the attackers, right? So they're looking at that endpoint. They want to hit that endpoint. They want to hit the admin endpoint, because if they hit the admin endpoint, they might get the passwords, or they might have privilege escalation capabilities. So the negative effect of that is that you're going to collect a crap load of data. And I say it again, it's a crap load of data. So what do you do with all this data? Well, you kind of have to put it somewhere. So you put it in a SIM or ELK or somewhere so that you can analyze it. What you can also do is, if you have the right type of endpoint agent, you can tell the endpoint agent to start to weed out information that you're not interested in. So like if you create that baseline of your environment, if you create the baseline of your systems, you can start to whitelist, we'll call it whitelisting for the lack of a better term, but you can whitelist certain events and tell the agent not to send them back up or not to log them. So you're creating a partial view, yes, but you're focusing your view on the information that's important that you actually need to have available. So what services are available? So some of this list is old because they did this about a couple of years ago, but each different agent has different capabilities. You've got Bit9, usually that's hash, file properties, registry, Carbon Black. So those two actually work together now. Management has certain things. Counterattack has certain things. There's a whole bunch of others underneath there, but for the sake of time, I've just put, if you don't want to buy one of those big systems, try Sysmon. There's a lot of good work going on around Sysmon that's been spearheaded by Swift on Security. And there's even some really cool ELK dashboards to analyze the Sysmon data. And the whole thing is, Sysmon is essentially one of these agents, right? I mean, it's just collecting the information locally on your system. That's for those people who have Windows environments. For Mac OS environments, you can just start pushing Mac OS logs. If you start, because it's a Unix system, as long as you're tracking the right level of Sysmon, you can send up Sysmon to your ELK stack. Some really good stuff there on Sysmon. So what you need, essentially, once you've gathering all that data, what you need to do is start looking at it. So you want to start looking at things that are weird. So this one, it's hard to read, but this one is downloading of an executable from a URL and saving it into temp. You've got certain IP addresses going. This is call to a server. So the funny thing is like, this is where it gets interesting, because this is actually a call to a 3.fr public server, right? So a user's website. So a user's website was being used to actually distribute a piece of malware. The problem is, because it's 3.fr, most of your proxies will, or most of your proxy level security will just ignore it because it's a real valid site. And 3.fr, you probably have whitelisted because they come up as a valid provider. So this kind of stuff gets missed a lot of times on the network side. And that's where, as a threat hunter, you find these types of activity, you want to go back and analyze it versus what you've